Now, boys and girls, question number 3B, right? It reads like this. Affirmative action policies draw as much strong criticism as strong support. Analyze the statement in the context of equality. Now, you see, do not let the second statement confuse you, right? That is, analyze the statement in the context of equality. Obviously, we know that this concept, affirmative action, is from paper 1, section A, topic equality, right? So it's a straightforward question on affirmative action, right? So you have to explain affirmative action, write its components, then write its critiques, right? Then defend it by writing the merits of affirmative action. Then you can conclude by mentioning a couple of lines on possible reforms on it, as well as something philosophical relating to Indian nationhood and the concept of equality, equity, social justice, and an egalitarian society, right? Because ultimately you have to address the second statement in the context of equality, right? So in the introduction, you can define affirmative action, right? So affirmative action dash, so what will fill in this blank? The stem word or the stem phrase that I have coined this concept of defining things. So take the example of emotional intelligence, right? In ethics paper. What is emotional intelligence? After all, it is nothing but an ability. So the stem word is always the word or the phrase that follows the definition given at hand. Now, emotional intelligence is the ability, let me just define it on the go right here, is the ability to process one's own emotions as well as that of others, right? The same way, take the example of federalism. Federalism is nothing but a political arrangement. Then you write all the features of federalism and the keywords required in the definition. Now, here, in the context of affirmative action, what will you use as the stem phrase? It is a system of policies slash set of policies slash or a regime of policies, laws, and government initiatives, right? And what do these initiatives do? They provide or extend support to the members of vulnerable groups that have suffered discrimination. Since when? Since historically. For example, reservation, quotas, scholarships, and other concessions, right? Now, affirmative action also refers to compensation given by the society to the historically oppressed classes. Here you give examples of these classes or the sections of society who have been historically oppressed, like in India's case, the Dalits and women. And an international example would be the blacks and the Native Americans in the United States. Native Americans being the indigenous Americans, colloquially called as Red Indians. Now it is termed as a racist slur. Now, then write what the scholars have to say about this. Now, scholars view this concept as a way of equalization, that is, creating a genuine level playing field, and also as a middle path between equality of opportunities and equality of outcomes, right? It is a method of engendering social justice in society, which is characterized, that is society that is characterized by systematic and systemic inequalities and discrimination, right? Now, this is the first part of the answer, the introduction. Then comes the second part, that is the components of affirmative action. So here you can start with the least controversial form that is practiced in the West, especially in the US, right? Affirmative action includes positive procedures that employers of organization may use to enhance the chances of the deprived sections or the discriminated vulnerable sections to overcome bias and discrimination, right? Another form, a stronger form, is providing skills to certain groups so that they can succeed in job competitions. And next you write the third component and the most important component, which is also the strongest form of affirmative action and also the most controversial form of affirmative action, right? That is quotas and reservations in jobs and education. Now that you've written the introduction as well as the second component of the answer, that is the components of affirmative action, the second segment of the answer rather, then you can write the hook statement. The hook statement connects the intro with the demand of the question. What is the demand here? Demerits, and then the critiques, and then the merits of affirmative action. Now, the hook statement goes like this. You can write like, affirmative action is an idea, a concept that is deeply contested, and it also gives rise to emotional reactions and responses in the society because of deep moral disagreement on this issue, right? Those who criticize this, even though it is a component of social justice, those who do criticize it do have a moral foundation. Their critiques have a moral foundation. You cannot disregard the critiques of affirmative action. So they are coming from a moral standpoint, a morally justifiable standpoint. It is not, it is a tenable standpoint. Now, the critique, right? So some critiques do not buy into the concept of social justice, right? They are not attracted to the moral appeal of social justice, and they view affirmative action as a form of discrimination, a reverse discrimination, which is displacing or substituting another form of historical discrimination. For them, affirmative action is unjust, unjustifiable, right? And then critics further contend / argue that affirmative action undermines merit. It compromises excellence by allowing less qualified, less excellent, less meritorious members to enter crucial positions in society, right? Then they further point out that the benefits that are cornered by creamy layer, the creme de la creme of targeted groups, right? That is the creamy layer of, let's say, OBCs or SCSTs, right? So they are cornering all the benefits when the intention is to engender social justice, and a large majority a large chunk of the members of these communities who actually require these kind of government support are not getting it, right? Then critics further note that instead of being temporary means, these policies tend to persist for decades because the political system, it reduces electoral incentives to reform this, right? Political parties, for them, it would be a political suicide if they even talk about reforming the system, forget abolishing the system, right? And in fact, they're incentivized to expand the scope of the system, including more communities within the umbrella and the ambit of affirmative action, right? Therefore, the naysayers, the skeptics, the critics, right, of affirmative action, they say this increases the group politics, the tribalism in political arena, right? Increasing existing social cleavages rather than diluting or eradicating them. So divergences, social cleavages would increase because of this, right? And next you can write that you are trying to correct affirmative historical injustices, but these policies penalize present day generation for historical oppression and injustices committed by their forefathers, their preceding generations. And another angle you can use here is that affirmative action ultimately harms the self-respect and personal dignity, a sense of confidence of those people who are benefactors of these policies. It engenders a culture of a dependency, a mentality of dependency among the reserved category and sections, right? And people, ordinary people, the non-reserved, the unreserved people, members of society, would question the legitimacy or the very position of a person because he belongs or she belongs to a reserved category, right? Then you'll write about the second aspect of the demand of the question, that is in defense of affirmative action. Here you can use scholarly arguments. Rajiv Bhargava, Ashutosh Varshney, US President Lyndon B. Johnson, right, who signed affirmative action policies in the United States, right? So Rajiv Bhargava, he says those critiques who talk about equality of opportunity and merit, they have a very narrow view of justice. They are basically proponents of procedural conception of justice, and they completely ignore or sideline historical deprivation, historical context to why this is needed. Next, you can use the thought of the argument forwarded by Ashutosh Varshney in his book Battles Half Won. Right, it's right here. It's right here. Battles Half Won. This fellow, right? Now, so he says, affirmative action aims to provide educational opportunities, employment opportunities to disadvantaged groups, to jobs and education to disadvantaged groups. Then what Lyndon Johnson says. So Lyndon Johnson said that blacks cannot be expected to compete among the whites because blacks were chained for centuries. So a genuine level playing field had to be created beforehand. Only then there can be fair equality of opportunity. Then in the conclusion, you can write that how India as a welfare state with affirmative action has made giant strides in development and engendering equity and egalitarianism. That also you can mention that affirmative action can, the policies of reservations, these require a rethink, a revisit, and a reevaluation and reforms, right? Such as including discerning or including a creamy layer among the reserved categories. Now, then you write something philosophical because the second statement said equity, equality, right? So a nation or a community has to acknowledge historical responsibility because remember, nation is not, so here I'm invoking Ambedkar's view of nationalism. A nation is not just a political project. And India is a civilization. Right? It is, sorry, nation is not just an imagined community, right? It is an active political project. And India is a civilization which is linked through its past, present, and future. And only, you cannot call, then you can write that to call a bunch of people living within a given territory, to call them a nation, equality is needed. There is no nation without equal citizenship, without equal fraternity, right? So, and then you can write how the founding fathers, they enabled reservations and affirmative action. Take the example of Article 14. Article 14 has the second aspect to Article 14 is equal protection of laws, right? Now that is the ultimate justification towards not treating unequals equally, right? Now, then the founding fathers, that is the members of the Constituent Assembly, they themselves made the very first amendment to the Constitution of India as a response to Champakam Dorairajan case judgment. So they included Article 15, Clause 4, enabling clause to reservation, right? So this, here you can end the answer.